Surrealism is all about love, liberty, and poetry. Sounds good, doesn't it? Almost sounds simple. May it please heaven that the reader, emboldened and become of a sudden momentarily ferocious like what he is reading, may trace in safety his pathway through the desolate morass of these gloomy and poisonous pages. Or as the director would say, these poisonous shots. For unless he is able to bring to his viewing a rigorous logic and a spiritual tension equal at least to his distrust, the deadly emanations of this film will imbibe his soul as sugar absorbs water.
All documentaries have their reason, but before the army, the machinery, the nocturnal nightmares of filmmaking begin, before the horror and the joy of filmmaking starts, something dreadful must happen.
I saw a thick patch of green oil from a machine, and I thought on the warm pavement in the wicked district long, long about my mother's blood.
Last night I dreamt I went to Menabilly again. Seemed to me I stood by the iron gate leading to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way was barred to me. Then, like all dreamers, I was possessed of a sudden supernatural power and passed like a spirit through the barrier before me. The drive wound away in front of me. We can never go back to Menabilly again. That much is certain.
Surrealism is an art movement originating between the two world wars, and it has an aim: to give birth to everything life permits.
Well, well. Everything that life permits would have to include a little cruelty and violence, wouldn't it? But everything that life permits can be described in just 3 words: love, liberty, and poetry. There's a catch, though. These words contradict one another. Life's like that.
That the worst excesses of surrealism are nowhere dead. No, they're still here.
I suppose the expression now is that surrealism lives.
That in every creative artist, there is a hidden vocation of a surrealist. That it comes up in Dante, it comes up, I've heard people talk about Jesus as being a surrealist, for example.
First came the movement called Dada, 1918 till 1923. But in 1924, a new review named Surrealism was begun. In October 1924, a manifesto of surrealism was included in the publication. That same month, the Bureau of Surrealist Research was opened in Rue de Grenelle, Paris. All members of the public were invited to share with the surrealists their dreams, their desires, or any wondrous experience which the world might call illogical.
Because the first thing is you have to become a sparkler, and then eventually you pass into the stage of atomic bomb, and then what you leave is kind of like radioactive influence.
Surrealism was a revolution in content, and Cubism was a revolution in form, and revolutions in form are always more important than revolutions in content. That's painting and sculpture, but in terms of literature, in terms of poetry and some prose, the reverse was true. Surrealism was a revolution in form, and therefore surrealist literature is ever so much more important than surrealist painting.
Poetry is all man knows of the universe. Consciously or unconsciously, all that humanity feels is poetry. The surrealist fools that they were knew this. They believed in poetry. Poetry is Cocteau's word for the spirit of art in all its forms. It is the soul of man. It is the soul's expression.
Words, the surrealists will say, and Rimbaud was the first to say it, I think, control everything in our life.
Breton made things magic through words.
Because I think poetry, for one thing, as a compacted form, leaves you, in a strange way, the most freedom.
Poetry permits man to see differently different things. His old vision is dead or false. He discovers a new world. He becomes a new man.
This is exactly what the Surrealists hope for. Poetry could be the spillway, the outpourings of the subconscious.
When Surrealism began, it was going to be a literary movement. It was all about poetry. They weren't expecting Salvador Dali to show up as a painter, or Louis Buñuel as a filmmaker, or Man Ray as a photographer, nor any of the others carrying Surrealism to such new heights. The first Surrealists, about 10 of them, only expected to use words to change the entire world. Only words. But first they wanted to state their case. André Breton would write a manifesto, and they started to look for what they called ancestors. They wanted to find writers in French history that they could claim as some sort of precedent, as cornerstones to their new ideas. They found 4 of them: Alfred Jarry, Lautréamont, Baudelaire, and Rimbaud. These men, they claimed, had been Surrealists before Surrealism began.
Alfred Jarry shocked people. Jarry's character, Ubu, threw ink straight into the public's face. The Surrealists couldn't wait to do the same.
The infant terrible, the adolescent Alfred Jarry, performs his writings with puppets operated by school friends in an alleyway, 1892.
It was a difficult birth, but then the doctor has arrived. Horn strumpet Ubu.
Oh, but look here, you. What kind of doctor are you?
I am a pataphysician.
Look here, you. Really, what kind of doctor is that? And what's going on behind me?
Pataphysics, my poor fellow, is the science of imaginary solutions.
But look here, what does that mean?
It means, my poor fellow, that the real show is on the inside. Take a gander. And as you, my creatures, the imagination is more than real. It is all of real.
One of the historical things that could be said about Surrealism has to do with Jarry. In his play, Ubu in Chains, Ubu Enchaîné, the epigraph is a quotation from not some other author, but from Ubu himself, in which he says, you cannot destroy everything until you have destroyed the ruins. And the only way to destroy the ruins is to erect some new buildings. And you think about that a while, and you realize that it is a description of the effort of Surrealism itself. Surrealism, I see, is a kind of counter-institution. When Dada had finished up just about ruining everything, not really, but attempting a great revolution of all values, you couldn't carry it any further. The only thing you could do was to erect new buildings on the ruins. So the Surrealists set up a kind of fake church. They knew perfectly well that it wasn't a real one, but they went through all the ideas. It was halfway between a parish church and a communist cell.
Dada negated. Dada tore down. Dada was proud of what it tore down. It was essentially something that couldn't go too far.
The pre-movement called Dadaism started in Zurich, 1916.
It was started by Hans Arp, but we tell everyone that Tristan Tzara started it.
Sammy Rosenstock was the real name of Tristan Tzara.
Hans Arp changed his name to Jean, perhaps on a whim.
Dada was exciting, but it was an art movement that did not produce, and this is why it died. Dada thrived on scandal, just as Surrealism was about to. They all said, scandal clears the air.
If I exist, I am not someone else, and scandal clears the air.
Dada was buried with much pomp and ceremony. Tristan Tzara's brilliant child came out of Germany, then Switzerland, settling in France. Dada said, burn the museums and deface the masterpieces. But it was Surrealism that sent men, guns strapped to their heads, into crowded theaters screaming obscenities. Surrealism was influenced not only by Dadaism, but also the Russian constructivists, who wanted to create new forms, not to destroy all that was. But it was a time of few visionaries, just World War I. After the war, the artists were horrified at what reality had brought them. In their search for fresh, uncorrupted meanings, they embraced the absurd, the accidental, the illogical, and the gratuitous.
How could you trust rational thought and logic when it had gotten us into this big mess of World War I? I mean, those values were obviously so decayed and flawed that they should be scrapped and thrown away. Dada was a hymn to the irrational, basically.
A hymn to the irrational?
Well, I think so. I mean, in the sense that they felt that was the way out of the dilemma. You demolished the whole system, dismantled the whole bourgeois structure through attacking its rationality.
And then the Surrealists, I think, were in love with something else, with positive values in life and being able to live a deeper and more profound existence. It was, I think that the Dada did come out of disillusionment with the First World War.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Yeah, and that Surrealism was born from the ashes of Dada, say.
Remember, along with Alfred Jarry, the Surrealists had claimed 3 others as ancestors: Baudelaire, Rimbaud, and L'Autrement, who by the age of 24 had written The Chants of Maldoror.
Probably merely a punishment inflicted upon me by divine justice. But who knows his own intimate desires or the causes of his pestilential joys? The metamorphosis never appeared to me as anything but the lofty and magnanimous echo of a perfect and long-awaited happiness. At last it had come, the day when I should become a hog.
If you can read The Chants of Maldoror, and it was the Surrealists' Bible, you plunge over that edge to the deepest, most profound pit of the unconscious. From that point, you begin to live.
Readers today of L'Autrement, because it's very tough going and very hard to read these passages. They are about as tough as you'll get in literature. They look upon it, I think, as something that is too absolute for reading. They look upon him as the personification of evil. It comes to that.
The artists coming out of the First World War were furious. They were in a rage over what the world had become. They simply picked up L'Autrement. They just picked up Maldoror and started screaming at the world.
Then suddenly, when he is least expecting it, to plunge your long nails deep into his soft breast in such a manner as not to destroy life. For should he die, you could not later enjoy his sufferings. O child, O golden-haired, gentle-eyed child, will you do as I counsel you now? Having spoken thus, you will at once have done injury to a human being and be loved by that same being. This is the greatest happiness the mind can conceive. Later, you can take the child to a hospital, for the cripple will be unable to earn his livelihood. They will call you a good man, and wreaths of laurels and medals of gold will hide your naked feet.
I would say it's a shock treatment. It's to pull us out from our lethargy. They talk about this a great deal. Mm-hmm. We are too passive in our acceptance of the rules of society, the rules of etiquette, the rules of behavior and so forth. And we're not going to remain that monstrous, we're not going to remain that violent, but we have to be violent and then find ourselves through that.
Well, you're horrified and also thrilled at being a human. Well, you're horrified and also thrilled at being a human.
The tempest blessed my wakings on the sea. Light as a cork, I danced upon the waves, eternal rollers of the deep sunk dead, nor missed at night the lantern's idiot eyes. Sweeter than sour apples to a child, green waters seeped through all my seams, washing the stains of vomit and blue wine, and swept away my anchor and my helm.
Let me ask you about Rimbaud. Is he the forerunner of Surrealism, and in what way?
Mm-hmm. I think it's Breton, in his very first manifesto, makes that claim. He says our real ancestor is Rimbaud, both by the example of his life and by the example of his work.
Rimbaud, writing between the ages of 16 and 20, the most exciting poet that France, and probably the world, has ever known, defended himself by saying he was trying to arrive at a spiritual lucidity, a state of inner awareness that he called la voyance, or vision. He did so by deranging his senses through means of physical excesses and exhaustions. By degrading his social and physical being, he hoped to attain a new functioning of the spirit.
Once, if I remember well, my life was a feast where all hearts opened and all wines flowed. One evening I seated beauty on my knees, and I found her bitter, and I cursed her. I armed myself against justice. I fled. Oh, witches, oh, misery, oh, hate. To you has my treasure been entrusted. I contrived to purge my mind of all human hope, on all joy. To strangle it, I pounced with the stealth of a wild beast. I called to the executioners that I might gnaw their rifle butts while dying. I called to the plagues to smother me in blood, in sand. Misfortune was my god. I laid myself down in the mud. I dried myself in the air of crime. I played sly tricks on madness. I became a fabulous opera.
To raise to the surface of the soul all that it's in the habit of keeping concealed. That's surrealism.
That is surrealism. Yeah? Well, it's a little hard to believe that everything that comes bubbling to the surface, everything you're trying to hide, is surreal. But maybe it is.
I would like to know why you consider yourself a surrealist. No, I know you do, Natalie. Don't deny it.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm a surrealist is because I believe, like the surrealist, that the whole purpose is to get to the supreme point of the cosmos, which is where life and death and reality and unreality.
Natalie, you don't mean all of that. You don't believe that, do you?
A viable, physical, almost visceral form of art in which...
Mopping. Sorry, Burl. You can continue, Burl. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Any attempt to really understand surrealism is doomed to failure, which is the entire purpose of the art itself. It may be termed the art of frustration.
Surreal, what is surreal? It's just the like you said, the subconscious, I guess. Right?
Rimbaud, yes, Rimbaud. I still, at dinner each night, when we always drink a toast before dinner, toast with our wine, and I always use the words of Rimbaud, who said,
We go through the unconscious to get to the same result that the mathematicians use with reason to get to the irrational.
Just great.
I like Surrealistic Pillow by the Jefferson Airplane. If that's surrealism, I like that.
Last night. Think of last night. What was the toast last night?
Oh, last night it was, O eternal soul, fulfill thy promise, despite the nights alone and the days on fire.
Avant-garde opinion identified surrealism with André Breton and his followers.
André Breton started surrealism. He did it in about 1924 in Paris.
Nobody ever eclipsed Breton, perhaps because Breton was the one who took political power. And it seems to me almost like a regime.
But the Pope was Breton, and he was saying who was on our index and who wasn't.
He really did not like music. And he married, and his last wife was a concert pianist.
Why didn't he like music? Was there a conflict between surrealism and music? I mean, it seems to me to be what little I know.
One of the phenomena I now think is that whatever Breton did not like, because he didn't like, he himself, Breton, became it wasn't surrealist. It wasn't surrealist to like music. Why? Maybe only because he didn't like music. Because, you don't like the color green, therefore it's not surrealist. I mean,
he had firm ideas, firm beliefs, a whole code of belief, and if anyone seemed to deviate from that, he would just excommunicate them.
This is something that has become associated with the history of surrealism, because these constant excommunications, they were called.
Andre Breton said that liberty is the guiding motivation of all surrealist activity. His life became a series of intense friendships and violent denunciations of former friends. For as the surrealist group became famous, so too did they violate Breton's idea of liberty. His idea of liberty went like this. Liberty equals the soul. The soul is the self, and your soul is your subconscious. You don't search your soul for money. You do it because you need to. Literature was more important than a weekly paycheck. If you wrote to make money, or you painted to make a living, you weren't long for the surrealist group. You would be excommunicated.
In any case, it's certain that Breton was often accused, particularly by those who'd been drummed out of the movement or who left it for some reason or other, of being the most anti-libertarian you can imagine, of being extremely controlling, of being a dominator. Of course, his nickname was the Pope, which was not always meant flatteringly.
On one given evening, Breton really sort of waffled. I mean, he fudged things. Instead of saying either this or that, and he really was such a, I mean, he set the tone. He was really at the center of everything, and he just became very elusive, and we were so fed up that four of us walked out. No sooner had we walked out, like being excommunicated. It was horrible. It was horrible. It was absolutely wrenching, and it's hard to explain. It's like leaving the Communist Party or the Catholic Church. I mean, we're just, where did we belong? But we were literally sick. I mean, it was awful. We stayed together, huddling like, what have we done? And we just,
yeah.
It was really, we had murdered the father. We also destroyed our home. I mean, where were we? I mean,
He could be, on the one hand, extremely violent, ill-tempered, and he had a talent for zeroing in on your weakest point and building up to it, so that little by little you were being, he was twisting the knife more and more in the wound, and so by the end of it you just felt you'd been emptied out. At the same time, he could counterbalance that with, I think, some very genuine affection, warmth toward people that he liked and respected. He could be extremely charming. He could be extremely receptive. He could make you feel that you were the most important person in the room at that moment.
To Breton, Salvador Dali became no longer a crusader, but a banker. No longer a surrealist, just a capitalist.
He was totally taken in by Mexican jumping beans. He felt there was something supernatural about this.
Breton was?
Yeah, he was. It's one of the great jokes of the surrealist movement. But he believed that these Mexican jumping beans really had some supernatural power. And
Breton thought that Mexican jumping beans had supernatural power.
Yeah. Well, don't mock it entirely. This is really the nature abhors a vacuum. And when someone has decided he is not going to be religious in the ordinary way, these religious inclinations come through the windows in some other fashion.
In 1929, Andre Breton, the leader of Surrealism, wrote a novel. His heroine's name is Nadja, which in Russian is the beginning of the word for hope. Nadja releases us.
Who goes there? Is that you, Nadja? Is it true that the beyond, that all of the beyond, is in this life? I don't understand you. Who goes there? Is it I alone? Is it myself?
Lady of silences, calm and distressed, torn and most whole, rose of memory.
I think they were very interested in new ways of total orgasm. In other words, the sex was a way of transcending the self.
The spirit and the self join only there.
Yes.
And everything stops contradicting itself only in sex.
Yeah, I do believe that there's an almost Indian devotion to the perfect orgasm, the perfect joining. And they certainly were quite remarkable in their devotion to all different sexual manifestations. In other words, they dared, I think, as no other ism or no other literary movement, to put sexuality in the forefront.
Woman takes, in the surrealist scale of values, the place of God. Here are the words of Louise Aragon.
That's a football toward night. I lose distractedly all memory of the day. Charming substitute, you are the abstract of a natural world, of a marvelous world, and in it is you, reborn when I close my eyes. You are the wall and its chink. You are the ladder and its steel rungs. Total eclipse, light. Miracle. And can we think of anything but miracle when the miracle is here among us in a robe of night?
Breton met her, stared at her, and couldn't forget her. And she left New York. They met in New York, and she left for Panama. And he couldn't stand the idea of not being with her forever for the rest of his life. He didn't even know her. L'amour fou. And he phoned all the hotels in Panama till he found her, proposed over the telephone, got her back, married her, and they were never separated for the next 20 or so years that they lived together. And although they had many different tastes, as you said, he didn't particularly love music and she was a musician, their love was so total. A kind of modern love in which there was a total adoration.
Yes. Oh, yes. She's a goddess anyway. She's a goddess on a pedestal, and reminds you of courtly love.
It seemed to me that Surrealism very often was terribly bourgeois in the sense that you had to have your love, and you had to live with your love and be loyal to your love. And they're full of wonderful love affairs.
Love is the single experience greater than man himself. It is older than he. When in the midst of love, man is unable to rest or orient himself with respect to space and time.
Because love is so perfectly balanced by desire and despair,
It is always in motion. Man is unable to fix himself within any part of it. He lives and grows and changes in love.
What's going on? Hey!
Who are you? What's happening?
Oh, it's Naomi. It's Natasha. What's your name? She's underneath the ground.
He lives and grows and changes in love. And poetry is his guidebook, a metaphysical guidebook.
love is the supreme experience where flesh and spirit cease contradicting one another. And this is the exact phrasing that Breton used in defining surrealism in his first manifesto.
Woman represents such a unique and overpowering knowledge of the world that it will have to be hidden from man. She is the source of the fantastic in the world, and he is mere spectator or poet, the one who contemplates the marvelous without understanding it.
Jacqueline Breton, for whom L'Amour Fou was written, claims that in all the years they were together, she never saw him without clothes. Now you write a wild book about eroticism.
Do you believe that? Do you think it's true?
It probably is.
One of his former mistresses, many years later, said that Breton had the gift to inspire love, but not the one to maintain it.
André Breton's character, Nadja, is part child, part woman, and partly living in the real world and partly in a dream. For the woman is the supernatural, the muse, the reason to live.
Magic in art believes that there's an equal value given to things that are seen and things that are not seen. Magic to the surrealists was called the marvelous. Common but surprising things put together can release the marvelous.
And where do you get the magic? Well, you get it from your subconscious. You already have it. It's in you. Now you just have to notice it.
Some years later, Aragon called the objects of our everyday life the daily miracle. And in 1946, Aragon went again to the painter Henri Matisse's house to collect what Matisse used in daily objects to paint from. This time, Aragon called them the palette of objects. The miracle of life lay just in front of us, in the objects. can create a work of art by creating an appointment with an object. The Surrealists always made an appointment with two objects, two very different objects, two objects they wanted to collide. The Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein said, all shots in a motion picture have to collide. He announced modern film editing, saying that when two different things come together, a third thing is created. A third invisible, often unexpected thing.
Apollinaire first coined the word surrealism to characterize the union of the arts. But they didn't merge easily. They didn't fit. They collided.
When you eat this stuff with lipstick, the lipstick gets everywhere.
These are the stamps that men have died for.
Surrealism doesn't quite function as pastiche or collage, but functions more as collision. It's like, let's see if we take this and mash it together and see what happens. Maybe God will appear.
Un Chien Andalou, paid for by Louis Buñuel's mother, was about all-empowering desire, the omnipotence of desire. Louis was 29 years old. Salvador Dali, the co-author, was also 29, and their film brought motion pictures to a halt. Andalusian Dog was the first surrealist film, and it changed the course of film history.
Oh, there was always the seashell and the clergyman in 1927, but let's not bicker about such things. The dog movie was more shocking.
Film is the means of expression most like the human imagination. It may fill the gap between what people say and what is in their minds.
In some ways, surrealism came to a halt with the cinema. It had to embrace it. Cinema was the ultimate surrealistic tool, but few could use it. Here it was, the answer, and there was no one to hear the call. We all still wait for the tool to be picked up.
Cocteau was successful in his artistic endeavors in a way which they resented. That he was succeeding at what they were talking about better than they were.
I think they disliked him, or talked against him, because in many ways he scooped their story.
Cocteau transcends at every moment. He creates the work of art that remains. I just taught one of his plays, Les Parents Terribles, just last week, and I saw how valid it still was, how it's still being imitated, and how it does its own very careful satire of the bourgeois way of life. Cocteau was really a conscious artist, and that must always be said first. The others were political. They were...
and he was not at all political.
No, there was this tremendous desire to... I mean, it's almost like you were casting votes for the Surrealists, and they could never agree with one another because they're always fighting so much, and you had to get a list of who was in and who was out.
Cocteau's artwork is all about childhood and how the child becomes adult.
I have a great one. So I'm talking about somebody who lived a life, tried to be the child, is Cocteau. Was there any talk about...
Oh my God, that's anathema. I mean, you don't talk about Cocteau to the Surrealists.
And why is that?
Well, that's the operator side of Cocteau. Cocteau was really a clown. I mean, he did write a few interesting things, but he was so contrived.
Yeah.
Really, no, he seemed to actually have been a pretty good guy, but there was something so phony about him, so tinsel-like.
It was very easy to be jealous of Cocteau.
He said, everyone is against me in Paris today, particularly the Surrealists are against me. They're against me as a person and against my work.
Cocteau, the most photographed man in Paris, was also called a fraud. After all, he was loved by both the rich and the avant-garde. He was offered the Norton Chair in Poetry at Harvard and was elected to the National Academies of France, Belgium, and the United States. He was an opium addict, never graduated from school. He was homosexual and the greatest multimedia artist of the 20th century. Beyond perhaps anyone else, Cocteau lived the life of a surrealist.
But the Surrealists disowned him. They just didn't understand. They, like others, could not understand how someone could be this good at something and then turn around and do something completely different. Jean Cocteau filmed Blood of the Poet in 1930, one of the greatest surrealist films ever made.
Jean Cocteau thought that there were two forces. One was society and the other man. And society was an evil force which tries to destroy man.
In relation to men's codes, the child is amoral, and he is tolerated because he does not know better.
You see, the child is always true to himself.
But upon reaching adulthood, he becomes socially responsible for his acts. Thus, he is now held guilty for disorders which were accepted as innocent in his youth. If he varies greatly from civilized norms, he is a criminal precisely because he is himself.
Cocteau just couldn't stand this. It seemed the ultimate perversion, the ultimate evil in living. The child is true to himself, and we rip that out of him. Consequently, for Cocteau and every other surrealist, morality entails being true to oneself.
Cocteau was always a conscious artist who felt the pulse of the time, and that cannot be said of all the others.
Cocteau was also Catholic by origin, and the surrealists, I think, generally, if you can generalize, were considered to be more atheistic in their anti-religious attitudes. In fact, they urged you to go out and vomit in the face of the nearest priest and things like that. It was not exactly pro-church.
The need for a spiritual absolute is felt more deliriously in adolescence than at any other time. This is why we have a child poet, a Lautréamont, a Rimbaud, a Jarry. Surrealism represented for the young the fantastic, l'émerveillé. Organized religion, however, does not fare well with the surrealist. He believes that God created everlasting strife, and whereupon has imposed this destructive existence upon a land and joyfully harvests his numerous victims. The surrealist has put Maldoror in harm's way, in the way of God. God is the vampire.
It was anti-everything, anti-religion, anti-family, anti-country. All the established bourgeois values had to go for surrealism. But then...
Where was it going to, once they all went?
Well, that's the thing, is they never stated that in the very beginning. They were just going to... It was sort of a cultural, in a very broad sense, glasnost. An opening up of the heart and the mind.
Denouncing government, denouncing de Gaulle, denouncing bourgeois civilization, denouncing order, denouncing work, denouncing everything, everything that holds people back from this leap into freedom.
The principal thing about surrealism as a movement is that it consisted of individuals who, although as a matter of policy they said they would never occupy a regular job, and even journalism was forbidden, they worked a great deal. They accomplished a great deal.
On a day when the sun was shining, Aragon would open an umbrella and invite a girl who tempted him to take shelter under. His friend Benjamin Perret used to suggest to customers at cafes that they should swap drinks with him. They would just wander about, picking on anyone. Philippe Saupeau, too, had loved to indulge in the idiotic. He would walk into crowded streets carrying a skeleton, claiming that it was a friend or a sister or mother.
I think he drank too much. He drank a lot.
Breton.
He never was drunk, but he drank a whole lot. And that's probably the kind of drinking that doesn't make you drunk, that doesn't interfere with your personal life, but must damage
But it's
your
constant.
body.
Constantly drinking.
Like many French people, and probably more, he had 1 or 2 bottles of wine a day, plus at least 2, 4, the equivalent of 6 or more glasses of whiskey.
Drinking. I think it's allows you to fantasize.
Said that wine was the ultimate, and you know, a good vineyard was the best thing. And I see that
these may be neurotic pranks, but isn't it true that 1 second of intense pleasure is worth an eternity of damnation?
In Breton, a lot of these things as well were a matter of style. That's a beautiful sentence. It's a bit of a mini manifesto, as it were. Beauty must be convulsive or will not be at all. I mean, it's a sentence that you could repeat. When it was originally printed in Naja, the word convulsive was in caps, so that you couldn't fail to notice it. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that beauty, when it's encountered on the street unexpectedly, has that very quick, very unexpected character that makes it what it is. You can't actually go looking for it. You can't go searching for it. But when it hits you, you should be available to it. The notion of availability was very important for Breton and the Surrealists. That you should always be open to things that you might chance upon or that might chance upon you. Don't close yourself off to them.
This is sort of you have to discover these places by chance for it to approximate anything surrealistic. But the places are there. Encounters with people you would never encounter in your ordinary routines. There are many people who can't take the disorder, the lack of order, the chaos that the surrealists relish because they thought it would open up the new experience, the creation. You can do it on vacation if you don't program, if you leave your vacation up to chance, and if you're secure enough to do it and venturesome enough to do it.
To the Surrealists, card games signified the power of chance, not the thrill of competition. When chance is at play, there is no duration. Time is suspended.
So this is yet to be resolved. So what is the law of chance? Can you help me with this?
And the best of chance allowed one to be guided by desire. Under 1,000 howls of memory's black winds, we have not known the need for the soul ordained, wandering to dark blind whores, nor the destiny of pleasure between their great satin walls. A sex more than a soul, more star than sex. A church her hair was set on top of her.
Chance, noun, that which happens, fortune, risk, opportunity, possibility, probability, casual, unexpected, originally, fall of dice.
Who's your favorite painter that might be considered a surrealist?
I don't know what a surrealist is.
No, didn't we discuss this once?
No, you never told me.
Oh.
Is this like when Picasso was surrealist or just an old man with funny paintings?
Picasso stabbed mankind and forced us to look at the blood. He was fascinated by who would follow him. What? Who are the geniuses of art's future?
Poets remember our dreams for us. You know, we forget 90%. We all dream every night, but we forget about 90% of what we dream. The poet remembers our dreams.
Which begs the question, who cares about remembering what we dream? What's the importance of the dream?
Well, the dream life is just as real as the waking life. And if we don't know, if we can't crack the code of our dreams, we're really only half here.
Through an association of images, of pictures, one can express an inner life. Through a bunch of pictures, we can arrive at what we are. For the unconscious is the richest source of artistic truth. And so these pictures should be what we dream of, our daydreams and our nightmares.
The Surrealists train themselves to follow their inner life, their imaginations, to become the magician, the seer.
The experience has to be filtered through what you would call imagination and interpretation.
And where did he place imagination?
The queen of faculties. The queen of faculties.
Science and Freud had taught the Surrealists that man is primarily a sleeper. The Surrealist must therefore learn how to go down into his dreams.
You're going to think there's a pat answer, but no, I don't dream. Maybe that's why I'm not a surrealist.
A lot of times that those images that come out out of the subconscious, and I'm not really sure, and I don't try to evaluate what I'm doing at the time it happens either.
Do you wake up in the morning ever and say, my God, I know what to do? I mean, I can change.
Yes, that happens.
That happens often?
Yeah. Well, I would say a large part of my work works that way.
The supreme point, which
which is God, basically.
No, I don't consciously think about the unconscious. I studiously avoid thinking about the unconscious.
I read something just today by Anaïs Nin, and she said that for her, Artaud lived the theater of the time, and she said it wasn't on stage. She said she heard him lecture about theater and the theater of cruelty and the theater of intensity, and she was absolutely frightened when she saw him. And he was so intense, he wanted to show everyone that you had to destroy life as it was now and to go to another more intense, deeper, profound existence. And after he finished his lecture, he reverted to be completely normal, and he took her out for a drink at a cafe. And she said she just never forgot how he could turn himself into a monster or into someone who seemed like he came almost like a character out of Frankenstein.
Antonin Artaud, a very mysterious figure who tried to put on plays in Paris at the time, the heyday of Surrealism, whom the Surrealists worshipped and approved of, and more than approved of.
And I think it was too much for Breton. Somebody, because probably Artaud was more surrealist in his life. I mean, he did take chances. He did not go out shooting, but he gambled his own person. And if he needed drugs to see what he had to see, he took the drugs. I mean, he went, but, and he gave a couple of readings that I went to, and he was incredible, but he was really a wreck. I mean, he had no more teeth. He was mad, but he was incredible.
I was present in Paris at the last time he appeared. He had no money to pay for his hospitalization. He needed help. Everyone in Paris knew this. He was a very proud man. And he said, "Can I give a lecture and charge for it?" And I'll never forget that day. I went, it was in the, I can't give you the date right now, but I could find it for you. Anyway, I went there and I saw André Gide there. I saw André Breton was there. Soupeau was there, and so forth. Camus was there even. He was a very young writer at that time. And he went on and on and on, moving us all, but went too long, and he was going out of his mind with the notes he had in front of him, trying to read them, until finally André Gide stood up. He was in the fourth row. I watched him carefully, went up to the stage, and just embraced him. And we all stood and clapped and wept, believe me. He was a man who was shattered by this.
In 1926, Antonin Artaud wrote, "All the mouths of the dead males laugh at the risk of their teeth.
Through the arcade of their virgin teeth, or through teeth coated with hunger and plated with filth like the armature of Abelard's mind. My mind is as slender as a hand. But the fact is that Heloise also has legs. The best part is that she has legs."
Of all the surrealists, perhaps the most pure was Antonin Artaud. He was the kindest and most hurt member of the surrealists.
Raises that thing like a sheathed sword.
The vessel of a raging hunger for total transformation, which could never find its appropriate nourishment.
He was a movie actor who could not find employment. He was a playwright who could not find a producer. Antonin Artaud was a surrealist, but he damned the whole group. He wasn't even part of it for long. He found Breton disgusting. He was beyond almost everyone. He frightened almost everyone.
It's the taste of a blood that gushes in cascades through the orifices of the brain.
Blood being a renewal. And you know that Artaud's great play, which I think is the best play of surrealistic invention, was The Jet of Blood in 1925, and that this play actually had blood streaming.
He was a man who lost his mind, and very soon, and then recovered his sanity and lost it again.
Born in an atmosphere of despair that applauded the suicide of poet-painter Vacher as the ultimate creative act, in 1918, Tristan Tzar wrote the Manifesto Dada. He said that the world was in such a total mess that the only decent thing for a writer to do was suicide. In fact, he was attacked for not killing himself after what he wrote.
Suicide is a badly formed word. The man who kills is not the same as the man who is killed.
Insanity, the Surrealists believed, was the liberation of the soul.
Yeah, I think the Marquis de Sade was almost the most important because he gave them a sense of the freedom of the mind as it can envisage any horror and make it valid. Sade is terribly important for the 20th century. It's almost as if in the 20th century we tried to lead a certain way of life that was perfected at the end of the 18th century and will never come back again. It's almost like a...
What is that? Yeah, define that.
It's like a nostalgia for everything that is licentious. And we haven't ever been able to do it again. The Surrealists are almost fighting a losing battle, never getting that free again. Because it always happens at one time that a certain way of life is perfected.
The Surrealist group actually numbered only about 50. They changed the world. The way we know it is mostly visual. We've been influenced by Jean Arp, Joan Miro, Salvador Dali, Magritte, Penrose, Max Ernst, Hieronymus Bosch. But wait a minute, we can't deny Bosch was a surrealist at heart, but he lived 400 years before surrealism was ever heard of.
Bosch.
Yeah.
And I think he's just incredible.
I mean, surrealism on one naive level could be said that it existed with you in Bosch.
Bosch extends no hope of salvation for man. His work is a symphony of damnation. The music lover is crucified on the harp, the gambler nailed to his own table. The influences of surrealism have been with us for hundreds of years. Everything that happened was real that summer night. But I make no complaint. I received life like a wound, and I have forbidden suicide to heal the gash. I wish the Creator to contemplate this yawning crevice every hour of his eternity. This is the punishment I inflict upon him.
What Baudelaire taught us is what the imagination creates is true and real. It's real. It is quite more than real. It's surreal. It's all of real. From this basic idea came all the surrealist poets. Benjamin Péret was the greatest. His subversive poetry had the color of the future.
We all have but one choice, to live without regret. We'll come. Men for whom this treasure was sung will renounce his bed, a grave. Hey, I'm no skeleton. We'll plunder a tomb opened. We'll seek the jewels revealed. We'll remember as on the day they were sealed. And we'll act. Men for whom this treasure was wasted.
When the poet inhales a woman's hair.
A story is told according to which St. Paul Roux, in times gone by, used to have a notice posted on the door of his manor house in Camaret every evening before he went to sleep, which read, "The poet is working." But who of all of them was the greatest surrealist?
Oh, that's easy. Someone who didn't even call himself a surrealist. Someone who wouldn't defend himself, knowing that a surrealist never examines his experiences and would never analyze the experiences of the marvelous. Oh, the only man I know who saw without explaining was Marcel Duchamp.
Nothing is serious enough to be taken seriously. And to answer your question directly, to make an art serve a purpose is to degrade it. And it's useless to paint what you can already describe.
No, he was amused. Duchamp was amused, and that was his attitude.
He said once, nothing is serious enough to be taken seriously. Did it always seem like that with him, that he was amused at everything?
It was not true.
It was not
But
true.
he was amused.
Yeah.
He was very serious about a number of things, but in a very elusive way. He was serious about friendship, for one thing. He was serious about his own work, about his mental processes.
Duchamp surpasses surrealism, if that's possible. He didn't create his own world. It was more of a universe. He became myth. The abstraction of surrealism, you know, the very core of it. Remember, surrealism is a way of life, and Marcel Duchamp lived a very long and happy life.
The bird is this human soul which Coleridge killed in order to live. I think that soon, very precisely, I shall know it.
All of Rimbaud's work was rage. Even the Illuminations, nothing but rage. This film is nothing but rage. All of surrealism is rage.
Their demand for a total artistic freedom remains unchallenged as a modern Western ideal.
Cut.
The great source of surrealist inspiration is love. The exaltation of elective love. Surrealism is the spiritual politics of joy.
Pierre Reverdy, a surrealist writer living from 1889 to 1960, said that the prerequisite for happiness, a gift we are born with, is perseverance, a steadfastness. And surrealists were steadfast, if nothing else. Their work and their lives made us uncomfortable but happy.
Surrealism is a spiritual politics of joy.
Surrealism is the spiritual politics of joy.
That it has to be continued, and because the world gets in an impasse over and over again, and this is one way out by the creative artist, using these strange juxtapositions of things that don't go together normally, that will shock us and make us think, make us look more carefully.
So you see it as a tool towards helping us...
a cure.
Yeah.
A cure of the spirit, of the depressed spirit of man, sure.
There's a lot of love, liberty, and poetry in that thought.
The last feeling surrealism leaves is one of happiness. Not, of course, in the sense that it excludes suffering, but because in it, nothing is rejected, resented, or regretted.
Well, all of a sudden I woke. I had been dreaming and talking. I dreamed that I had said, I may live badly, but at least I don't have to work hard to do it.
Well, he acted like he was on the verge of being sacrificed.
And then I said, to think of the acorn, it is necessary to become the tree. And the tree of night is the hardest tree to mount, the dourest tree to scale, the most difficult of branch. But there was no detective in my dream. That's something else.
Dear, dear lady, is it possible to foresee the arrow destined for the future eye?